Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about, except I don't really have anything too groundbreaking to mention, although I do want to say that I was trying to get caught up on all my emails and messages that I've fallen way behind on. I got through about 200 emails, but I still got a few more to go. It is a long weekend here in Canada, and I will be spending part of the weekend doing a bit of ice fishing with my family, so long as the ice stays frozen, but I'm sure I'll find a bit of extra time to finally get caught up on all these emails and giveaways. Other than that, I do want to mention that I do work with Alex over at Boardgame Code to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns so that I can put together this video here today. So if you do like this sort of content, be sure to check him out as well. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below because he provides a bunch more content related to crowdfunded board games. And he also puts together a video each month going over the upcoming campaigns that we know about so far for that month. And if you're specifically interested in the historical war games, you'll definitely want to check out Zilla Blitz. I do share my list with him as well, and I generally don't dive as deep into these style of games, but he has a bunch of other sources as well. He'll provide you even better and even more information regarding those games, and I will have a link to his channel in the description below as well. And that's it for an intro, just a short one this week, but we do have quite a lot of games to cover, so let's check them out. And launching on February 20th, we have Stacks and Stacks. And this plays 1 to 5 players and takes just 15 minutes to play. And this is a competitive set collection game that plays over just 2 rounds, with each round starting by dealing 3 stacks of cards in front of each player. The way this game works is that players will be able to take a few different actions on their turn, with one of those actions being to play a card from the front of one of your stacks, matching it with one of your opponent's stacks in various ways in order to claim those cards for yourself into a pile of claimed cards that are going to be granting you victory points at the end of the game. If you don't have any options for that, you can also choose to draw cards from the main deck, and those will go straight into your hand. And the nice thing about these cards is that they work the exact same way. You can use them to match with other players' cards, but you can also use them to match cards from your own stacks as well, which is super valuable because you actually want to get rid of all the cards in your hand and the cards in front of you as quickly as possible, because all those cards are going to be worth negative victory points at the end of each round. Also, getting rid of all the cards in front of you does also trigger the end of the round, so if you're able to do that while other players still have cards in front of them, that's going to guarantee that they get negative victory points for that round. But there is one more action that you can take if you think that another player is moving a little too quickly for you and you still got a lot of cards to get rid of, and that is the action to play up to 3 cards from your hand into one of each stacks of an opponent player. Of course, to optimize this action, you do want to have at least 3 cards in your hand, but this is a nice way to get rid of cards from your hand while simultaneously prolonging the amount of time it's going to be taking another player to get rid of all their cards. The game continues like this for 2 rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 20th, we have Inferno, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are trying to guide souls into the appropriate layers in Hell. The way the game works is that players will be able to interact with the town in different ways in order to accuse various townsfolk, which somehow ends up with their soul turning up at the graveyard, and then players will be able to use actions to send those souls into Hell and then navigate them into the appropriate areas. Each layer of Hell is color-coded to a different color, and then each of the souls will have a color of their own, and you're going to be trying to match those 2 colors together in order to determine where that soul needs to go. Once a soul reaches the appropriate layer, you're just going to lay that soul down, leaving it there for the rest of the game, indicating that it has reached its endpoint. The game plays over a series of rounds of just 2 phases. There's the Hell phase, and then there is the Town phase. The Hell phase is pretty straightforward. Players are going to be taking turns paying to move a soul from the graveyard into the first layer of Hell, or instead moving an existing soul in Hell down the chain links to where it needs to go. Something that's cool about moving the souls through Hell is that generally you can just move them 1 space, but once a soul's reached its destination, like I said, you're going to be laying it flat and it's going to remain there for the rest of the game. But what's cool about this is that if you move another soul through a soul that's laid down, that essentially acts like a free movement because you'll be able to move through that soul any number of times until you reach a space that is unoccupied. There is one more caveat to this, and that's that there is a certain layer that requires a pass to get through, and players will have to use actions during the town phase in order to get those passes. And you're going to might indicate this by putting your colored token in that location of the board, which will allow you to move through that location for the rest of the game, but if you don't have a pass, then you are not allowed to move through that layer. If you're unable to move any of the souls out on the board and you don't have the money to move a soul from the graveyard onto the board, you can take a loan in order to gain additional money in order to do that. But this can come with some consequences at the end of the game depending on your relative position. But the end of the game is triggered immediately on the current player's turn if they're unable to move any souls out on the board, whether or not they take a loan. This means that if a particular player feels like they're in the lead, they might try to force the situation to happen to trigger the end of the game and potentially secure the win. But if the end of the game isn't triggered, then we're going to be moving into the town phase where players are going to be using worker placement in order to complete different actions out in the town. And you might have noticed that there are a few icons out on the board, and depending on where players moved their souls, that's going to determine the types of actions that they can take in the town, because you're going to be matching the icons that you move souls onto with the different options out in the town. Each player does also have their own personal player board where they're going to be keeping track of all their various workers, and it also allows for a location where they can build up their tower that many of the actions are influenced by, and it also creates a location where players can invite different guests that they can also accuse to eventually send them to the graveyard. But the different action locations will allow players to do things like gain money, reposition their workers in various locations, gain a pass in order to pass that specific area out on the board, add additional layers to their tower on their personal player board, add resources to your tower to unlock benefits from cards that you can use for the rest of the game, or manipulate the various guardians out in hell that will be able to manipulate the souls and the board in various ways that you could possibly use to your advantage. Like I said, there's also an action that you can use to accuse townsfolk in order to send that particular colored soul to the graveyard. But then there's also going to be these various tracks that players will be able to move up in different ways. And every round, Dante is going to be moving deeper and deeper into hell. But as he moves down the layers, he's going to be triggering different icons, which will then trigger a check for that specific track to see which player is further ahead on that track, gaining them additional benefits. And the game continues like this over a series of rounds until a player is no longer able to place a soul or move any souls out on the board. Now that's going to be triggering the end of the game. And then you're going to be adding up all your victory points, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, there is a bunch more info out on the campaign page already, but if you do want to get notified as soon as it launches, you can follow along, and I will have links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 20th, we have Forgeflame, and this is a game for 2 to 4 players. It takes about 60 minutes to play, and this is a game where players are each going to be controlling their own team of 3 adventurers into mines and try to gather different resources and deliver different sets in order to forge certain relics, and the first player to forge 4 relics is going to be the one to win the game. Like I said, each player is going to be controlling 3 different adventurers, but each of those adventurers are going to have their own set of unique abilities and an associated miniature. Players are going to be using deck building and then using those cards in order to take actions and move around inside the mine, but each time that a player plays their 4th card, they're going to be adding a new upgraded, more powerful card into their deck, making them a little bit stronger for the following rounds. The players won't be just up against their opponent's teams as they race through these dungeons, because there's also going to be different enemies and challenges and events that players will have to deal with throughout the game. I don't have a whole lot more info on how the game plays at the moment, but if you do want to check it out, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below, and the game continues like this until one of the players completes their 4th artifact. Then that player wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. Like I said, I have it linked down below. Also on the 20th, we have Dante Inferno, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 180 minutes to play per chapter, because this is a cooperative campaign-driven game where players are going to be playing through the Italian poem with the same name as they journey through the 9 layers of hell. Players are going to be choosing their characters at the start of the game and then playing through a number of chapters, with each chapter coinciding with one of the layers of hell. The game features branching storylines which can change with the player's decisions, as well as their successes and failures throughout the game. Of course, with the theme that involves players moving through hell, you can expect that a lot of the artwork and the environments that you're going to be encountering are going to be quite grim, and a little bit of that horror and mythology thrown into a board game can be a lot of fun, and this game does look quite ambitious with the story that it aims to tell. And if it's able to deliver on that, as well as providing some compelling gameplay, this is definitely one that a lot of people are going to have their eye on. So it's no surprise that this one is our Discord pick of the week. And something that I really like that I'm seeing about this game is that since there's just 9 layers to hell, it looks like there's just going to be 9 chapters in the base game. I'm sure there'll be a few expansions and additional chapters added throughout the campaign, but it's nice to see a campaign game that isn't asking for a whole year or a few years of your time in order to play. This is one that I think a lot more of us will be able to actually complete. And if you are looking for that additional content, I'm sure they will provide that as well. And something else that I do like about this game is that it does follow that traditional flow of gameplay that you see in a lot of those campaign boss battlers style games like this one, where you're going to be going into a bit of a exploration or town phase, trying to prepare yourself for the boss battle at the end of the chapter. But what makes this one interesting is that instead of that phase being in a town or at a camp or anything like that, you're actually going to be in one of the layers of hell, exploring that layer of hell and facing different challenges and making choices, and those successes and failures are going to dictate how well you do and prepare yourself for the final boss battle. Single double-sided board is used to support both the exploration phase as well as that final boss battle, but of course this more simplified side is used for the exploration phase because each of the layers of hell will have their own deck of cards. You're going to be laying them out on that grid, and then players will be able to explore those cards in order to flip them up and discover the different points of interest and opportunities and choices that they might provide. Players will be doing all this to gather different resources, items, and intel to help them in their future battles. But of course, once the end of that phase is triggered, players are going to be moving on to the other side of the board and setting it up according to that specific battle. Players will all draw a hand of cards, and then they'll be using those cards to perform their actions, as well as taking any free actions they want within their turn. But essentially, players will be attacking by rolling dice, healing, or performing other effects to help them or hinder the enemy. Players will also be able to interact with the terrain in various ways. And what's interesting about this game is that there are multiple levels and structures that players can climb onto and interact with that they might be able to take advantage of throughout the battle. As you might expect, players will be recycling their discard pile back into a draw deck in order to get their cards back again, which can be very useful to perform those more powerful attacks or those specific actions over again. But each player will also have their own champion board as well, which you'll be using to track a few different stats and effects, but you can also play cards from your hand onto these boards in order to perform a more powerful version of that card. This makes that action way more powerful, but of course you only have a limited number of spaces on your board in order to do that, and it also does take it out of your deck, so you may not be able to use it again in that battle. But after all the players have performed their turn, you're going to be drawing a card from the enemy and resolving its effects. And the battle continues like this, alternating between the player's turn and the enemy's turn until the players are able to complete their objective for that battle. And if they're able to do so, they'll get the benefits of that battle and move into the next chapter. Of course, the game provides a ton of really neat miniatures for all the characters and all the bosses and enemies that you might go up against. If you are interested to see what those might look like, you can check them out on the campaign page, which I will have linked in the description below. And of course, you can click that notify button to get notified once the campaign launches. Also launching on February 20th, we have Zombie Horde, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 90 minutes to play. And this is a cooperative game where players are going to be in a post-apocalyptic world where they're trying to work together to fight back against the zombie horde and hopefully find a cure. I couldn't find a whole lot of info on this game, but it does come from a designer and publisher that created a whole bunch of really excellent games, especially one that I was really interested in, which is Neomorphosis, which I thought had a really excellent design as well as a lot of very unique ideas as as well, and I think this game will do the same. It does follow that same style of gameplay that you might find in a lot of other cooperative monster, horde, or zombie games, where you're going to be alternating back and forth between the players and the zombies, with the players getting 3 actions each on their turn, and then resolving some cards to determine how the zombie horde reacts. But what makes this one a little bit different is that there is going to be a colony phase as well, and I think what that means is that players are going to spend some time back at their colony using different items that they might have found throughout the game in order to craft and create different gear and resources. That really does bring in an element of survival into this game that I think is a really interesting idea. With this in mind, I feel like this one is taking more of a realistic approach to a zombie apocalypse, so if you are interested in that, I will have this linked in the description below, and of course you can click that notify me button to get notified once it launches. Also on the 20th, we have Vampire the Masquerade chapters, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play per chapter, because this is a cooperative campaign-driven game that is very focused on narrative and takes a lot of elements from your traditional RPG. One thing to note about this one is that you don't need a game master in order to play it, but players will be playing as various characters with different stats, and players will also be playing as vampires. Players will be given a ton of agency in this game, as they'll be able to make all sorts of decisions within a single scenario, with each of those decisions offering branching paths and different outcomes depending on your successes and failures, as well as a whole host of narrative to go along with whichever path you end up going down. As you might expect with an RPG, players will also be able to build out their characters and level them up and gain different gear and items, as well as upgrade their stats in various categories that will be able to help them with certain skill checks, which could help you in a whole host of situations, whether you find yourself in a more social atmosphere or maybe straight up in battle. Each scenario will be outlined in the scenario booklet and will instruct players on how to set it up, but between scenarios, players will be able to go back to their home base, buy different items from their different suppliers, and prep for the following scenario. There's over 60 scenarios offered in this game, which is quite a lot of content for anyone who's interested in this, and this is a game that was already previously released, so if you want to learn more about it or if you want to see other reviews or playthroughs, I do recommend checking those out before you jump in on it, but if you do want to learn more, I will have links to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 20th, we have another opportunity to back a game that was previously released, and you can go ahead and check out those reviews now if you are interested to learn more about it, but this is called Black Rose Wars Rebirth. This one plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 90 minutes to play. This is a game that I have covered in the past, and I did take a look at this campaign to try and figure out what exactly they're offering new here, but I couldn't really tell based on how they presented the campaign. It's not really obvious, but it looks like they're going to be adding a bunch of expansions as part of this campaign. I don't know if those were already previously offered or if any of these are brand new. And they do say that this is your last chance to get this bundle at a very special price, but you can pretty much say that about any campaign, because if they were to launch a campaign again in the future, that price is probably going to change, and probably there's going to be other items included in that bundle that just don't exist yet. So I wouldn't suggest feeling too much FOMO from reading that, but if you are interested in getting this game, this is another opportunity to do so. And like I said, I did cover this game in the past, so if you do want to know how it plays, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one really misled me. I thought it was going to be a reprint, judging by the name. Usually you have words like rebirth or re-something if you're doing a reprint. But this is actually a brand new standalone game that you can actually consider as a second chapter in the Black Rose Wars series. And although this is going to be a different game, there's still going to be a ton of similarities to the original. And the original game was a competitive fantasy game of deck building, strategy, and combat. And this new one's going to be that exact same type of game. And in both these games, players are powerful mages competing to reach the top of their ranks by fighting in hexagonal rooms. But in the original, you were destroying those rooms. Well, in this new one, you're actually going to be fighting in those ruins while trying to rebuild and reestablish those rooms that were previously destroyed. And this one's going to be our pick of the week, and it's not surprising as the original game has had some really nice reviews and a really great rating over on Boardgame Geek. And all these tiles start very green and overgrown with vegetation because this game takes place 25 years after the original Black Rose Wars. And players are going to be using 6 schools of magic to achieve their different goals, and each school of magic behaves a little differently. One might help you summon powerful creatures, one might deal direct damage, while another might allow you to enchant and deceive the other players. The game system is divided into a few different phases, but each turn you're going to be gaining a new spell of your choice, and then you're going to be planning your strategy in advance by placing cards face down to reveal later. And you're going to be doing things like attacking other players, solving missions for the Black Rose Order, summoning powerful creatures, or rebuilding those rooms. And just like in the original, if any player is killed, they're reborn immediately, but a little bit of energy is fed to the mage that caused it. There does seem to be a ton more similarities between these games, and there are differences, and I think it really does blur the line between a reprint and another iteration in the series. But definitely go ahead and check out the On Table YouTube channel, because Jonah did a really great job going over all the differences between this second chapter and the original game. My personal opinion here is that these games are a little too similar for me to ever want to own both of them. I'd probably just pick the one that I like the most, which would probably be this newer one, because I can only assume that they've streamlined a few things and improved on the initial rule set. And if I already own Black Rose Wars, I'd probably just keep that one, but I'd definitely check out the rule set here to see if there's any takeaways or improvements that I might want to house rule in the original game. Also launching on the 20th, we have QUARTETnary, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 25 to 35 minutes to play. And this is a simple game of set collection where players are going to be dealt a hand of cards, and then on your turn you're going to be asking another player if they have a certain type of card, because each of these cards are going to be in sets of 4, and it's up to the players to try and collect those sets. Then you'll be able to lock them away as victory points for the end of the game. The rules for this game are very similar to that of Go Fish, where you'll be able to ask a player if they have a certain type of card, and if they have it, they have to give it to you, and then you also get another turn. If they don't have it, then you're going to be drawing a card from the deck, and then play moves on to the next player. What makes this game unique is that the sets of cards represent large spans of time over the development of the Earth. This means that each set is going to be telling a little bit of a story over time, and they can all feature different elements or geological formations for players to discover. It's also a very simple rule set, and that, tied with the educational element, makes this a great option if you're looking for something to play with the kids. As always, if you want to learn more, I'll leave a link to the campaign in the description below. Also on the 20th, we have an expansion for the game Ostia, and this one's called the Pirates expansion. If you're not familiar with this game, this is a game that plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 80 to 150 minutes to play, and I did cover the original game back when it launched on Kickstarter, so I will roll that previous footage for you shortly. But I do also want to mention that this is also my own personal pick of the week. And I do have a few reasons for that. The first one being that I was really interested in that original game when it launched. I didn't end up backing it, but I did end up kicking myself afterwards for not backing it because it ended up getting a lot of positive reviews. But even aside from what other reviewers have to say, this game's also coming from the designer that created one of my favorite games of all time, which is Aqua Garden, and it's such a fantastic game. It's probably in my top 50 games of all time, so I'm surprised that more people don't make a fuss about this game. And if we're talking about my top set collection games, this game would probably be in my top 3, possibly in the top 2. That being said, I haven't played any other games by this designer, so I don't know how consistently I will like his games, but looking into Ostia myself, it does look like a game that I would like quite a bit. So with all of that combined, it does give me a lot of confidence in this game, and this is probably a game that I will end up backing. But this new Pirates expansion is going to be adding quite a lot to the game because this is quite a major expansion. It's not just adding more of the same, instead it's going to be adding in brand new elements in 4 different areas. There's going to be the pirates, which will pose a threat to your fleet throughout the game, but they can also gain you some benefits if you're able to defeat them. And players will be able to collect weapons and soldiers to help them face off against these pirates. There's also going to be the market, which is going to introduce some different rewards for being the furthest ahead or behind in certain areas. And then there's also the Home City Supporter, which allows players to get some ongoing special abilities that they'll be able to keep throughout the game. And then finally, there's the Ostia Town, where players will be able to dive deeper into the town that they are delivering at and actually build some buildings and get some ongoing benefits from those as well. Like I said, this is a campaign that I've really been looking forward to, and one that I do intend to back, but I will be doing a bit more research before I fully pull the trigger on this one. But if you do want to know how the original game plays, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And the main mechanisms in this game all do revolve around a Mancala system, and if you're not familiar with that mechanism, it's basically when you just pick up a bunch of pieces from one spot and then place them one by one across a series of other spaces. And the way that this game does that is in your individual player boards, where players will be choosing one of these areas on their turn to activate, and that's going to allow you to gain resources equal to the number of ships that you have on that space. But then this is where the Mancala system comes into play, because you're going to pick up all those boats and then redistribute them by placing one in each of the spaces clockwise. So you'll get your resources before you did that, but then the cool thing is that wherever your last boat lands, whichever space that is, you'll be able to perform the specific action of that space as well. So you're kind of balancing having a lot of boats on a place so that you get a lot of resources, but then you also want the right amount of boats so that you end up on the action that you want to take. And the different resources are things like permits, which help you move across the board, and then wood, wheat, and stone and gold that allow you to upgrade different aspects of your board and build new ships. Each player will also have ships on the main board that they'll be able to move through the different areas of the board, and then you'll be able to interact with different regions and items and resources that you come across as you sail across the ocean. Making different discoveries there and completing different objectives will allow you to move up the reward track, which will also make all your victory point rewarding resources reward you even more victory points. And the end of the game is going to trigger when one player reaches the top of the track. And the reason I'm so excited about this one is that it just looks like a really elegant design. I really like the way the Mancala system is integrated and the way that it gains you resources, but then it's also tied in with the actions that you can perform. All the components and artwork all look incredible as well. This is really my type of artwork. I really like how clean it looks, and I really like how all the little components are made of wood. And artwork and components won't make me like a game that I think is a bad design, and they also won't ruin a game that I think is a good design. But it does make playing a game that I do enjoy just a little bit more enjoyable, so I really do like to see it. If you are interested in this one, you can also pledge $1 in advance to make sure that you get the new supporters expansion completely for free. And this is 100% refundable, although I am not a huge fan of this marketing tactic. It's more just a way for you to put some skin in the game, because that does increase the likelihood of you backing the campaign in the end, which I am unfortunately seeing more and more campaigns doing, and they do always say that it helps them more accurately forecast demand and production numbers, but they're already getting your money up front for the campaign. So honestly, that just sounds like a bit of BS to me anytime I hear this for any campaign, and it does pain me a little bit to see it for this campaign, since it is one that I am really interested in and one that I do recommend. But if you're just putting the dollar in because they're sort of strong-arming you with the way that they have this set up right here, I would suggest getting that refund just out of principle, but I'm not going to go into all the ethics and my thoughts on all of this in too much detail right now, but maybe I'll make a video on that in the future if I ever find the time. Also on the 20th, we have Swamp the card game, and this is a competitive game where players are each going to be selecting a hero and putting it out on the table. Then each player is going to be drawing 4 cards from a shared attack deck, and then on your turn, you're going to be able to draw 2 more. But on your turn, you're also going to be drawing a card from the monster deck, which is going to have some sort of defensive value, but it's also going to allow the players who defeat it to draw a number of treasure cards from the treasure deck. But if it goes undefeated, then the active player is going to lose as many life points as indicated in the top left corner. But the active player is going to be able to play attack cards face down, also adding the attack power from their hero if the attack type matches their hero's attack type. The active player can invite other players to engage in the attack as well, and they can also put in cards face down. And then all the cards are going to be revealed, and if the enemy was defeated, the active player is going to decide how to split up the rewards from that treasure deck. That deck can offer all sorts of things like weapons and runes that you can use to deal increased damage, but there's also magic flowers that can be collected in this deck, and you need to collect a certain amount of those in order to win the game. And you might ask, why would you ever give any of these rewards to the other players that helped you? And the answer to that is that they probably won't help you again in the future if you're stingy with the rewards. But the game continues like this until enough of those flowers are collected by a single player, and then that player wins the game. And if you want to learn more, I will have a link to this in the description below. Also on the 20th, we have Biome, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes just 1 to 2 hours to play. And this is a competitive game where players are trying to build the most biodiverse ecosystem. Players are each going to have their own individual player boards where they're going to be playing different cards for different costs, with each of those cards only being able to be played into an ecosystem that supports that card. The cards can be different animals or plants, and adjacent cards can benefit from each other if you get the right synergies, and each card's going to be introducing a new action that players can perform on their turn. The way the game plays is that each player is going to be starting with 2 cards out on their board, which is going to allow them to have a few actions right out of the gate, but one of those cards is going to be an animal, and one of those cards is going to be a plant. Each round represents the 4 seasons in a year where players are going to be taking different actions depending on the season, but at the start of a round, each player is going to be able to draw 2 more cards into their hand, and then they'll also be able to collect 2 resources of their choice. The resources have a few applications within the game, but their main use is to pay for the cards when you put them into play, because the resources do represent food for the animals or light for your plants. And when you do pay to put a card into your tableau, you also have to take into consideration the restriction that certain cards can only be played to the marsh, the prairie, or the jungle, or some combination of the 3. Certain animals can also create nests and have babies if you put them adjacent to the appropriate vegetation, so you'll also want to take that into consideration if you want to maximize your points throughout the game. But there are also some predators as well that would be happy to do your babysitting. But a really neat aspect of this game is that each card you add into your tableau is going to have a unique action specific to that card, and you'll be able to take actions periodically throughout each of the seasons. But something to note here is that each card's action can only be used once in the entire game. So once you used an action, you'll never be able to use it for the rest of the game, which means that you really want to be thinking about when you use these actions, because even though an action might be useful now, it might be a lot more powerful later in the game. But players are going to be gaining victory points for placing their cards, as well as performing various actions and having babies and feeding those babies. But then there'll also be different objectives that players will be trying to complete, such as filling up different rows or columns, or having certain patterns of vegetation or animals according to the cards that were drawn for that game. The end of the game is triggered if a player maxes out the victory point track, or if a player's tableau is completely full. And then at that point, you're going to be adding up the victory points for each of the players. Then the player with the most victory points wins the game, and if you are interested to learn more about this one, I will have it linked in the description below. And now for games launching on the 21st, we have Boardquest Tales of Liria, which plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play, and this is a campaign that I did cover a couple times in previous weeks, but it just keeps getting pushed back, so it should be launching on the 21st, but I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this will be offering both a board game as well as a digital video game. Each player is going to be controlling their own faction, which each has its own unique playstyle and deck of action cards associated with it, but each faction is also going to have its own hero, and you're going to be playing as this hero, and as you level up that hero and upgrade them, you'll be able to unlock new and stronger cards from your deck. There's a couple different ways that you can win the game. You can either eliminate all of your enemy heroes, or instead you can control a certain amount of forts. On a player's turn, they're going to be drawing a new card from their deck and adding it to their hand. Then they're also going to be gaining gold, but then also spending gold depending on how many recruited units they currently have. They'll then be able to perform any number of actions like recruiting a unit, upgrading a unit, selling an item, buying an item, discarding a skill card, activating an ability, or moving or attacking an enemy in range. And there's a couple different enemies you can fight in this game. There's monsters that you can find out on the board, and if you're able to defeat them, you might get different stat upgrades or special effects. But you can also attack the other players. But the combat's the same whether you're attacking a monster or another player, and all you have to do to land your hit is have an attack power that's greater than their defense. The way that you calculate this is that you're going to be adding up your attack stats to any of the gear that you might have or any special effects. And then you're also going to be rolling 2 dice and then adding those values to your attack power. And then if your attack is larger than the defense, then you're going to be inflicting a certain amount of damage. This is great if you want to try and win the game by eliminating your enemies, but like I said, you can also conquer forts. And in order to control a fort, all you have to do is move onto a space that has a neutral fort, and then that fort will become yours. But the interesting thing about controlling a fort is that the unit that you use to claim that fort can no longer move, attack, cast any skill cards, or use any active abilities. but they do get a +2 to their defense, so they do have a little bit extra defense when it comes to defending. Also launching on the 21st, we have Street Masters as well as a new expansion called the Lament of the Blood Moon. And if you're not familiar with this game, it plays 1 to 4 players, takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a cooperative scenario-based game that allows players to play either one-off scenarios or to play a story mode linking a bunch of scenarios together to tell an overarching story. The game plays over a series of rounds, with each round starting with the players getting a turn in any order, where they're going to be able to refresh any cards that they used during a previous turn, but then they're going to be drawing a threat card. Players will then be able to get a free movement, but then they'll be able to play a card from their hand to perform an action, which can allow them to do things like defend, attack, take additional movement, or interact with different items or points of interest out on the board. The threat card drawn is a personal threat to that specific player, but then after all the players have had their turns, there's also going to be a shared enemy that's going to be getting a turn, and you're going to be activating any of the revealed enemy cards at that time in order to determine what that enemy is going to be doing. After the enemy's actions are resolved, you're also going to be resolving some stage cards with any of the stage cards that are revealed at that time, and then you're also going to be drawing one from the deck. The game continues like this, with players taking turns performing their actions until they've defeated that final boss. The Lament of the Blood Moon expansion is going to be adding a brand new boss with the largest base in the game, as well as several new unique minion types, and it's also going to be introducing 4 new stages into the game, but there's going to be a bunch of new enemies, allies, and content throughout the campaign as well that will be added to this expansion as the campaign unlocks different stretch goals and as different content is voted on by the backers. The core game here has been out for quite some time, so there's a ton of content and reviews out there if you want to learn more, but I'll leave a link to the campaign in the description below. Launching on the 22nd, we have Candy Hunters, and this is also a campaign that I did cover a couple weeks back, but it got pushed back until now, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is an abstract strategy tile placement game where players are going to be trying to create different patterns in order to score victory points if they're able to achieve that pattern. But the way that this game works is quite simple, because on your turn, you're going to be placing a new tile into the neighborhood. And then once you've done that, you'll be able to move one of the ghosts. If you move the ghost into an area that has a trick-or-treater on it, then it's going to scare that trick-or-treater into an adjacent tile of your choice. But then at the end of your turn, you're going to be checking if you can find any of these patterns out on the board. And if you are able to do so, you're going to be gaining any victory points for trick-or-treaters that you have within that pattern, but you're going to be losing victory points for any ghosts that you have in that pattern. So you might want to use your ghosts to try and get in the way of the other players, but also use them to push the trick-or-treaters into the patterns that you think you can fulfill. Or you might just want to move the ghost to get it out of the pattern that you're trying to achieve so that it doesn't make you get negative victory points. Anytime that a tile with a trick-or-treater is scored, it's going to be flipped to its other side, essentially removing it from the game. And the game continues like this, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And launching on the 22nd, we have Blight Sea's Fleet, and this is a naval skirmish game set in a post-apocalyptic world. And it also looks like players will either get to go up against or play as a zombified navy fleet. But this is a miniature skirmish game, which I don't normally dive into in too much detail, but it looks like this is a game that's going to be giving you a 5-turn limit, alternating activations, as well as missions or objectives scored at the end of each turn. Of course, there's going to be a bunch of different types of units and miniatures that players will be able to use to their advantage, with each of them working a little bit differently. But if this is a style of game that you're interested in, I will have it linked in the description down below. And one last thing I want to mention is that I did read somewhere at some point that Zombicide, the Army of the Dead, was supposed to be launching on the 23rd, but I don't even think this one is going to crowdfunding anymore, and I don't even have too much certainty of when or if this one is going to be launching. I don't know if anyone does, including Kaman, but I did read somewhere at some point that this was supposed to become available on the 23rd, so if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for it, but no guarantees. And that's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still got a few awesome giveaways to announce. And the first one is for a pledge for Sea Dragons. And if you're not familiar with this game, This is a game where players are going to be drawing different shape cards and then placing their sea dragons out on the board in order to create different shapes and also to cover different icons for different benefits in order to try and score the most victory points at the end of the game. Of course, I did cover this one in more detail during the week of its launch, and I do have a video up if you do want to learn more about all the details on how to score and how the game plays. But this giveaway is going to get you a copy of the game, and all you have to do to enter is leave a comment down below with the hashtag dragon, and you can say anything that you want, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know who the coolest dragon is. I mean, there's Smaug from The Hobbit, Balron from Game of Thrones, but these all pale in comparison to my favorite dragon, which is definitely Mushu from Mulan. And the next giveaway we have is for a game called Lovestruck, where players are contestants on a reality dating show, but some of the players are there to find love, while others are there just to gain fame. Players are going to be trying to deduce the goals of the other players to try and end the game with the appropriate partner, or just end the game with creating as much drama as possible. And this giveaway is going to get you a copy of the game as well as all the Kickstarter upgrades, and all you have to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag love. And you can leave a comment with whatever you like, but maybe you could let us know what your ideal Valentine's Day is. For me, the answer is the same pretty much for any special occasion, either drinking wine or getting sushi. There's never a wrong time for sushi. And the last giveaway we have is for a Pledge for Forks, which I think looks like a ton of fun and like a really clever game. And this is a game where players are going to be drafting cards and then handing cards off to the other players. But the cards that don't get selected actually determine which cards are going to be scoring points at the end of the game, as well as which cards are going to be losing you points at the end of the game. The game is very easy to teach, very travel friendly, and I think offers quite a lot of depth for a very low complexity game. And if you're interested in this one, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag forks, and you can leave any comment that you like, but if you are looking for something in specific, maybe you could let us know if you came to a fork in the road, which direction would you choose to go? The Grey Steel City, the Blue Crest Harbor, the Yellow Vista Sands, or Green Acres, or Bedrock Ridge? Once again, I'm going where there's sushi, so Blue Crest Harbor is the choice for me. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, and the pledges we had to give away were a pledge for Ludos Asia, as well as Trailblazer, the Arizona Trail. In a draw winner, I use this fancy application here, and the first one we're going to draw for is Ludos Asia. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my supporters over on Ko-fi, and if you like this content and if you want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, I do really appreciate it. It really does make a massive difference for me, and you can find a link to that in the description below if you do want to show your support. Let's go ahead and draw those comments and Facebook. Now let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner is Pickle Buckeye. And this is one of our viewers from the comments, and they say that they would love to visit Korea. That would be a blast. Congrats on the win. Just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out. And also bring me back some kimchi. Now let's go ahead and draw the winner for Trailblazer. So we're going to do the exact same thing here, except we threw in the hashtag trail. So let's draw those comments and draw another winner. And the winner of Trailblazer is You Know Me, which is one of our members from Ko-fi. So I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here. So congratulations on the win. But that is everything I have for you this week, and I hope you've all had a fantastic week with a ton of games getting to the table. And I hope you just had a fantastic year. I've been playing a ton of games since the start of this year, especially with the Level Up retreat happening so soon in the year. I got to play a ton of games there, but every week I've just been playing multiple games, which is a really nice change for me because I've been so busy and away from all my friends over 2023. I really wasn't playing games that frequently, but this year has just been really good with a ton of games, both new ones and some of my favorites. So it's really nice to start making a dent in that shelf of shame. But I just started playing Oathsworn, and now Agamonia has come in the mail, and also 7th Citadel just came in the mail today. So as soon as I start making progress, all these giant campaign games show up on my doorstep, but I'm really excited to play all of those as well. I'm going to see if I can figure that out and just make some time for it, because board games are pretty awesome and there's so many different experiences and challenges that each one brings to the table. And it's just fun to take those on with a few of your friends, which is why I always do mean it when I say, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.